Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 14 Pro Max has been out for 6 months at this point. It's been my main device that I've used every single day, with the exception of reviewing the 14 Pro and the other 14s for about a week or so. But other than that, I've used this 100% of the time as my main device. So I wanted to share the overall experience, as some of it's been great, some of it hasn't, and also how it's held up as far as durability, battery life, and of course we'll talk about things like the dynamic island. Now, the overall design is very familiar. It's basically a progression of what we had with the Series 12, 13, and now the 14. Apple tends to do that for 3 years in a row. You'll see basically the camera bump grew over that time. So it's increased in size a little bit. We've got some battery upgrades, some processor upgrades, and camera upgrades. Most of those things are really nice to have. The camera is a bit of a sort of debate at this point, but in general, it's quite good. As far as overall durability, well, let's go ahead and take a look at it. The stainless steel tends to hold up pretty well, although it's a fingerprint magnet, so it will show all of your different fingerprints from using it, just hanging onto it if you're not using something on the outside of it like a case, and you'll see it's holding up quite well. However, if you were to get really close and in maybe direct sunlight, you might see some small scratches. So some of these mostly are just fingerprints, but you might see some small scratches here or there. However, as far as the glass goes, you will get pretty good protection with that without a screen protector. However, it does have some scratches on it. So as you can see right here, there's a scratch right there. I'm not sure how it happened, but in general, the ceramic shield has held up really well. So after 6 months of just putting it in my pocket, then placing it on a table like this, picking it up, sometimes putting it face down, but I'm very careful with that, it's held up very well. It's holding up about the same as the other ceramic shields, which is much better than, say, the iPhone 11 Pro Max. As far as the camera lenses, the same is true here with the Sapphire. It's held up really well. No bumps, no scratches, other than maybe around the bezels of the cameras, but the actual Sapphire itself has held up really well. So you can see some of the maybe finish has come off of this, but it's not actually cracked or anything like that. So these are holding up well, just placing them on the table. Now, of course, all of that could have been avoided if we used a case from today's video sponsor, Caseku. Now, I've been keeping my iPhone 14 Pro protected with their Magic Stand case that has raised bezels around the cameras and also the display. So that helps a lot, and it also protects it quite well. It's available in clear like this one. We also have some other colors as well, as translucent to a nice deep purple, and it has a hidden stand built in that allows for 40 to 120 degree angles, and it's also magnetic, allowing you to use MagSafe accessories. So be sure to check them out. I'll link them in the description, and be sure to use code Zollotech for a little bit of a discount. Now, as far as overall battery life, it's really been hit or miss with the 14 Pro Max. With the 13 Pro Max, it was quite good. With the 14 Pro Max, despite running different betas, of course, that somewhat can be caused by iOS updates, but let's go ahead and take a look at battery. We'll let it load here just for a moment. You'll see I'm only down to 93% today, so I've used 7%, and it has about an hour and 3 minutes of screen active time, 2 hours and 19 minutes of screen idle time. So it's doing quite well today. However, yesterday wasn't as good. Using almost 75% of my battery, I had 4 hours and 13 minutes of screen active time. So it really depends on different apps. I've tried moving apps around, adding them, removing them, seeing how they actually affect battery. And so far, it's doing okay, but it's not getting the amazing battery life I used to get regularly with the 13 Pro Max, despite this technically being a little bit better. Everyone's experience may vary a little bit, but it definitely isn't as good as maybe the 13 Pro Max was for me. Battery health is at 98%, and you can see this is after 133 cycles, according to Coconut Battery. So battery life is on the decline. iPhone 13 Pro Max had excellent battery health. Even after testing betas, up to a year later, I had barely just moved from 100%. 80% after 2 years is normal, so I'm not really concerned with this, but it looks like Apple built in a buffer to go above 100% on the 13 Pro Max, where they haven't done that as much on the 14 Pro Max. So not too much of a concern, but it is something that is changing more rapidly than it has before. As far as the display is concerned, it always looks great. It's similar to last year as far as its resolution and has great viewing angles, but this year goes up to an incredible 2000 nits of brightness. You won't find too many phones that will go that bright. You can get close, but not 2000 nits. Now that's a peak brightness outside, so maybe you're in a very bright environment. it will stay that way for a little while, but it will pull the brightness down a little bit as maybe the phone's getting too warm. It really depends on the outdoor sort of ambient temperature, and that makes a difference. But I've never run into an issue. It's quite bright where I live, and it seems to stay bright long enough to use the phone. One great thing this year is PWM, or pulse width modulation. The way it controls brightness doesn't really bother my eyes at all. According to Notebook Check, anything above about 39% brightness, it actually starts to go into more similar of a DC dimming mode, meaning you can't really see the flicker even at 240 frames per second, which means it's easier on your eyes and won't bother people that are sensitive to PWM, which is about 1 in 10 people, including myself. So if we compare this to maybe the S23 Ultra, while that may be a great phone in some aspects, the display really bothers my eyes on that one. And that's true of many other phones. This time around with this phone, it doesn't, and it's even improved from the 13 Pro Max. So it seems much better, at least for me, in my regular day-to-day use. Of course, we also have the always-on display on the Pro models this year, so it's really nice to have it. I'm not really sold that it has to be there, but it's nice to be able to glance at your phone, see the time, maybe see some information from the widgets that you have set, and it's just nice to actually have that as an option. You can turn it off, you can turn off the wallpaper if you want, but it's nice to have that always-on display, and it also ramps down the speed of the display to save battery to 1 hertz. It will impact the battery a little bit, but to me, the feature is worth it. Of course, if you want to turn it off, you can, of course. And the number one thing I get asked about with the newest phones is the dynamic island and whether or not it's worth upgrading just for that. And typically I will tell people, no, it's not worth upgrading just for the dynamic island, but it's nice to have. I know some people prefer the notch, but I actually like this in the sense that it's something that is really sort of a playful thing, very Apple-like, and I'm not sure why my Apple Watch decided to do that. Maybe I hit the power button a few times. But if we go into maybe music and press play, swipe home, it goes to the dynamic island and we can see it. It's more of a playful notification area that's really nice. If we maybe get out of that, then we go to maybe plug in our phone, we get a notification there. So we plug in the phone, it lets us know the dynamic island expands and it shows us what's going on. The same is true with not just music, but setting things like timers and different apps that are starting to utilize this. So if we press play, you'll see it goes into the dynamic island. We can swipe it back, go back the other way, get rid of it, swipe it again. It's really just a nice playful thing to have here, but it's not easy and convenient as it's at the top of the screen. You can use the reachability feature where you swipe down at the bottom, but again, it's something that I think is nice. It's nice to have for now while we have to have sort of an opening for that with the camera and Face ID sensors, but it's not something I would run out and buy a phone over. But again, I do think it's a nice little feature. Now, one of the controversial things this year is the new cameras. Some of it is due to it being over-processing of different images, and some others just don't like the way it looks, but it's quite good, but has some downsides as well. I've been using it in a lot of different videos. In fact, I used it for this video here, this iOS 16.4 Beta 1, even more new features video. I filmed this outside in HDR, and if I press play here, you can see that the actual quality, we have HDR options up to 4K. I filmed it with an iPhone 14 Pro Max. It's super bright and vibrant and does a good job. And if you color correct it a little bit, I found out that it actually looks quite good. Of course, you have ProRes if you want, and you'll see how bright it is. It's just super bright that since this isn't an HDR video, you can barely see it. But it does a pretty good job, but I do have some complaints. I think the HDR is a little bit oversaturated compared to last year. And also one thing I really don't like this year is the actual focus distance. So if we go to the camera, let me bring in the 14 Pro as an example. You'll see here, without using macro, I can get, well, about this close, maybe 6 inches to a foot away. I can get until it starts to get blurry. Otherwise, I have to use 2x zoom and it's still a little bit blurry. If I get really close, of course, I could jump to macro if I wanted to. We have that option. But other than that, you just can't get close enough to whatever you're filming. You could do that before with the 13 Pro Max as the focal length was different. So again, if we go into here, maybe get as close as we can get really close without it switching to macro. So let me turn off macro. And you'll see you can still get pretty close. about half the distance you could before. So it was much better before, in my opinion, as far as that goes, and that's just a difference of the overall sensor and the lens. But I do appreciate it, and I also appreciate that they've made the forward-facing camera have autofocus. So if we go into the forward-facing camera, let's switch around here, you can see that it has autofocus this year. It didn't before. And if we switch to video, now we're recording from the 14 Pro Max forward-facing camera. Again, it has autofocus, so if I bring in something maybe like the 14 Pro Max, it should focus on that, or the 14 Pro rather, and then bring it away, it should focus back on my face. It does a good job of that and has a pretty decent microphone. The camera's not perfect, but it's definitely getting better, and I think they'll improve it hopefully next year with that focal distance issue. But it's nice to have 48 megapixel raw photos, but they do tend to be overprocessed sometimes, unless you have some of the latest beta updates. They seem to be a bit overprocessed. Now, I did want to mention the speakers as well, as the speakers have not blown or anything like that. They sound great. So again, if we go back into my video, hit play, iPhone 14 Pro Max, so we'll talk about the experience, battery life, as well as some news that we can expect from future Apple products. They sound pretty good. They're still nice and clear, and they go plenty loud. I would say they're still questionable as to whether or not they're better than, say, the 12 Pro. My wife actually had a 12 Pro before she went to a 14 Pro and said the speakers sounded better on it. So that's just something worth noting, but I wanted to bring that up. But they sound good still. They haven't really had any issues, and overall performance has been good. We have had some weird bugs with the dynamic island and swiping home. That hasn't been too much of an issue for most people, but it does seem to come and go from time to time. As far as other features that this includes, such as crash detection, well, I actually have used that, but it was triggered by my watch. I was in a car accident some time ago, and, well, a couple months ago now, and my watch actually triggered crash detection, but my phone didn't. And I would imagine that's because it was in my pocket while I was in the car, but my watch was here. I actually had to stop it because everyone was fine and walked away without an issue, thankfully, but this actually triggered it, and it worked as it should. I haven't used satellite connectivity since I haven't really needed it where I live, but it's nice to actually have it on the phone. I'd say the number one concern I have for this is iOS. iOS has seemingly gotten more and more buggy, and they are sort of fixing things and refining them, but hopefully with the next version of iOS, iOS 17, which should be shown in June, which is just a few months away at this point, hopefully fixes a lot of those concerns. But so far it's been fairly buggy, but of course we're going to get years and years of support and updates, and since this is only 6 months old, we should have another 5 years of updates at this point, well into maybe iOS 22 or something along those lines. So if Apple continues to release them every year, we can expect that sort of update cycle. But that's really it as far as the iPhone 14 Pro Max. I've been using it for 6 months, enjoying it for the most part, and it's been getting better and better. Hopefully battery continues to improve though. Let me know your experience in the comments below, and of course if you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, it will be linked in the description as it always is. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.